Hi everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I'm Terry Ryder, founder of hotspotting.com.au, and I'm speaking today with Tim Graham from Reventon on the subject of how to select the right property for you, the individual investor. Whenever I do seminars or webinars or live Q&A broadcasts, I'm often asked questions like, where's the best place in Australia to buy? Or is it better to buy new or established? Are houses better than apartments? Are the capital cities better than the regional areas? And a host of other similar questions. And the reality is the right answer to those and other queries depends on the individual. There's not one right answer to these types of real estate questions. It's really about you, the individual, and your circumstances, your age, perhaps your income, what you currently own, your risk profile, your personality, your life goals, and a whole lot more. So that's our topic today, and there's nobody in Australia better to talk us through these issues than Tim Graham from the Property Investment Advisory Reventon. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Terry. That's a lovely introduction.
You're most welcome. It's so true though, isn't it? You're probably the same. You probably get asked those kind of generic questions about where's the best place for us to buy, and you sound like you're being evasive when you say, well, I actually can't give you a direct answer to that. We need to know more about you, the individual.
Yeah, that's right. Look, it's the age-old question, isn't it? Where's the best place to buy? What's the best thing to buy? But truly, the only way you can really determine that is to ask 10 questions deep. What do you currently have in your portfolio? What do the plans look like for the next 5 to 10 years? What are the goals? And a lot of the time that, as you mentioned before, it might be the age. It might be your goals over the next couple of years when it comes to children, all these different things. So there's a lot to dig into before you get to the point about talking about an actual property.
Yeah, but perhaps before we get into the nitty gritty of that, perhaps you could just tell our listeners a little bit about you and Reventon, what you do and where you are and how you can help investors.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, for those who don't know, Reventon, we were established in 2005, so celebrating 16 years this year, which is great. And essentially, we're a holistic financial services company. So we do everything A to Z, everything property. So it could be from mortgage broking, helping you determine what your borrowing capacity is, talking about the right loans for the right products. Then we go through to helping you select property. So we do buyers advocacy, both in the new build and established space. And then from that point on, we've also got the property management, so we can help manage all the properties for you. Then we've also got accounting and financial planning. So really, I suppose what most of our clients like is there's a 1300 number. You can call that. The left hand knows what the right hand's doing. Essentially, you've got a 1300 number, and you can get all the answers done under one phone number rather than shooting off all over town.
Sounds like a one-stop shop for property investors around Australia.
That's it. And look, the big thing with that is that you can use one of our services or all of our services. You might already have your own conveyances, your own mortgage broker. We can work hand in hand with them.
And you probably be very, very busy people right at this moment, given the circumstances with property markets right across the nation of Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting to see, not just in the real estate sector, but everywhere, how much businesses have pivoted since this pandemic hit. But what it meant for us was that we went national overnight. I can be having a conversation with somebody in Perth, and it might be 8 o'clock for me and 6 o'clock for them, but we can do that over a Zoom call now, and it's opened up huge opportunities for businesses like ours, because we can service people, over this at the comfort of their own home, anywhere in Australia, really. So it's been really interesting times.
Yeah, I think the approach that we took 12 months ago, when everyone was in panic mode, perhaps, was really, where's the opportunity in all this? And I think a lot of companies in the real estate space in particular did find that there were some great opportunities if you're willing to take that attitude. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I'm sitting here in Melbourne at the moment. We're in 4.0 lockdown. And look, to be honest, the sentiment is actually quite good. When talking in relation to business owners and people working in real estate, certainly they're all singing from the same hymn book, which is that they haven't seen markets like this before. I was chatting to a guy down in Geelong, a real estate agent, this morning, funnily enough, and he had an auction on Saturday. They set the reserve for 1.1 and it sold for 1.54. Just amazing.
Amazing, except it's happening like that every day.
Everywhere,
Locations right across Australia. I've just been putting together our new edition of the Price Predict Index, which we do every quarter, and I've been taking the previous edition and adjusting the figures for median prices as I go through the analysis. And the change from 3 months ago till now in so many locations has been extraordinary, like 10%, 15% rises, which would be big in annual terms, but they're actually 3-month increases.
That's the thing, yeah. We so we do 6-monthly reviews with all of our clients as well, on valuations on their property, making sure their interest rates are right and things like that. And obviously we had our finger in the pie in Geelong nice and early, so we had clients down there buying in 2014-15 who were seeing some exceptional growth. But just looking at the first quarter of this year, you're looking at 7% if you're down in some pockets of Geelong as well. So I'll be interested to see what happens when we see CoreLogic's latest data at the end of this, at the end of the financial year as well.
Yeah, I think it's got longevity about it. It's what I said is a once in 20-year property boom. It's very rare for Australia to have a truly national property boom, but that's what we have at the moment. The last one was almost 20 years ago at the start of this century. But to turn perhaps to today's specific topic, as I think you alluded to a little bit earlier, there's no one size fits all for real estate investment, and it's important for prospective investors to understand that.
100%. And look, it's not, we're obviously going to be talking about real estate itself, but what's really interesting about this as well is that you don't just want to get the advice on the real estate. It's really important to get the right finance product to work with that as well. And I think we've sort of been trained to look for interest rates, and obviously the cheapest interest rate, let's go for that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's the right policy. And I think it's really important not only to get advice when you're thinking about real estate, but also to make sure that you get the right finance advice as well. It could, every different loan product will have a different policy. You might be thinking about having kids in the years to come. Do they have, in years to come, does it look, does this particular policy have things like maternity leave? Will that allow you to still service the same in 6-12 months time? We've seen a lot of that through the pandemic as well. Lots of COVID babies. And, it's really important that when you're starting to think, especially if you're buying something that could be, off the plan with land or something 6 months down the track, 12 months down the track, if these types of conversations are happening at home, we need to be thinking about that as well, because it could have a big impact on whether or not you can service that loan.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, it's so true that the best package in terms of loans for people is not just about how low the interest rate. Quite often the best package, it might have a slightly higher interest rate than the lowest, but there are other factors that might determine that's the very, very best for the individual borrower.
Definitely. And then obviously that can flow on to things like self-managed super funds, finding the right lenders for that. Self-managed super fund loans are very different to your typical residential loan. And there's a lot more players in that market now since the changes to the lending earlier this year. Going back 6 months ago, there was only a couple of lenders that you'd consider, but there's a lot more in that space now. So getting the right advice in finance is incredibly important too.
And one of the things that I find that a lot of the investors don't really think about is the importance of buying in the right structure, the right entity. And I think a lot of investors overlook that and perhaps think about it when it's too late. And I think it's really important to get that right.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether that was buying within a trust, whether it's the split on the ownership, obviously from a tax liability as an investor, you want to make sure that you're getting the best bang for buck. So it might mean that you're doing an 80%, 20% split with your partner if one's slightly higher income, things like that, getting that sort of advice, because it's an expensive exercise to change that later.
And then sometimes it can be very, very expensive.
Yeah.
So in terms of finding the right product, the right property, and the whole package that's right for the individual, what are the key factors that distinguish one individual from the next? The key characteristics that need to be taken into account and arriving at the right result for the individual.
I think it starts with for us, we do a discovery with our clients, and first and foremost, we want to educate them on an unbiased approach, which I'll talk to you through a slide deck a little bit later. But on a high level, we want to talk to them about what the pros and cons to each asset class are, so houses versus units, etc. From there, we want to start to talk about your goals. Okay, so you might have a plan, because obviously the younger you are, you might be chasing growth. The further on in life, you might be chasing yield. So we really want to determine what's in your portfolio at the moment. What do your goals look like for the next short, medium, and long-term goals, so that we can identify what the best asset class in the best area would be for you. And it's interesting, one of the big questions that's been around for a long time in real estate is, typically houses outperform apartments, but you can't say that across the nation, can you? And certainly, you would argue that somewhere in Noosa with a nice view over the beach will certainly outperform a house and land package in Wagga Wagga.
Yeah, and there's a school of thought out there, and I'm going to be very interested to see whether it actually evolves this way. It's starting to suggest that because we've had such uplift in house prices, that it's going to get to the point where some people are priced out of the markets they want to be in, the location they want to be in houses. There's going to be attention switching to apartments, so we might see a surge of growth in apartment values. There's certain plausibility to that argument, I would think.
Look, if you asked me that 12 months ago, or maybe slightly more than 12 months ago now, I would tend to agree, because we were starting to live up rather than out. People want to be closer to the CBDs, closer to the amenities, but COVID's changed that. I'm sitting on St Kilda Road here. I live on St Kilda Road as well. The vacancy rates are about 13-14% at the moment. Yeah, COVID's changed it. People are living at home. They can living at home, working from home, and they can choose where they want to work from now. So that's why we've seen such a push to the regions, Terry. Yeah. We've discussed that a lot with affordability and lifestyle was making that possible to begin with, and there's COVID is just it's absolutely set it on fire, because people are going, well, I can live at Torquay and still be working on a usual 9-to-5 job. We don't have to turn up to the CBD anymore.
Yeah, well, I think the trend was underway before last year, but I think the impact of the lockdowns and other impacts from the pandemic has turned what was a steady drift into a stampede almost, and it's now become a very, very strong trend. I think it's going to continue, because it's more about technology and lifestyle and affordability than it is about the pandemic. It's just given it greater impetus. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, that on the flip side of that is that we have seen certainly a lot of people have thought, let's pick up and move down to these regional areas, and they've picked that lifestyle, and then all of a sudden businesses are starting to say, well, actually, we need you back in the office now, and it has put a few people in some hot water.
Okay, yeah, it needs to be well considered. It's not an easy thing to do, to uplift an entire household and move, and therefore it's not so easy. It's also very costly to have to move back. So you need to be very sure that you're making the right decision and you've got the parameters right.
Yeah.
Okay, so is now a good time to sort of share your screen and perhaps talk?
Yeah, certainly. So I suppose before I do that, this is a really simplified document, and I don't think any of our listeners would struggle to know the difference between a house and an apartment. But it's actually really good to go through this exercise, and I do this with nearly all of my clients from the beginning. And the reason being is because there might be one or two little things that people may not know, and some considerations that we should take into play. We start with this, we go into areas, and then we come back to this. And the reason I do that is because, as I mentioned before, in some areas, houses might be more suitable than apartments and vice versa. So we'll start with this, and then we can sort of put that into, I suppose, a few case studies after this.
Okay.
All right, so let me know when you can see my screen.
Yep, you're there.
Okay, so houses versus townhomes, and then on to apartments. And a lot of people don't know there is a difference between townhouses and townhomes. So it's a really good exercise to go through, because there'd be things that people may not consider when purchasing one of these entities. It could be from a financing perspective. As an example, if you were looking at a self-managed super fund, you can't go and buy a block of land and then build a home on it. You can't get a construction loan for those things. So it's really important that people sort of look at what is it I'm looking to achieve, what finance products are available to me, and then we choose the product specifically for that. So what's going on here? There we go. Okay, so what's a house? A house is a standalone dwelling on a single title. The pros to that, typically you're going to get more space in comparison to apartments and units. You get more outdoor space a lot of the time. You get very good privacy. Flexibility can be much better as well. So typically, if you're looking at apartments, if you've got a complex of 50 units, there's a very good chance your one better looks identical to the second one. Okay, in houses, you've got a little bit more flexibility with that. You can often get better finance in place with houses. And typically what we've seen over the years is you do tend to get a better resale value because of the land component. And for those that don't know what I mean when I'm talking about a land component, obviously we know in Australia, every single property goes down, okay? The house, that's why we can depreciate it. The land is the only thing that's appreciating, that's what's going up. So typically what we find is that the larger a piece of land, the better value you're going to get in uplift. So the cons to that is it can be quite often be a higher entry price. In order to find value a lot of the time, we've got to go further out from the CBDs. So that can be a kind of, we've got a budget of 450,000. It might be very hard for us to get into a house nice and close to a CBD. It means we've got to go further out, but I can buy apartments nice and close. So that's a consideration we need to think about, and that flows onto the location. So when we think about the cons on houses, if I have to meet a certain budget, I might have to go further out, and further out might be less desirable for you to commute to work, things like that. Typically on houses, we might find that we can, especially as they get older, we find a little bit more maintenance. And obviously that's at the cost of the owner as opposed to the body corporate. Often higher rates as well. So the land component being bigger, we typically have a larger rates bill at the end of each quarter. Townhouses. So townhouses are on a strata title. They're a multi-dwelling, which is designed to mimic a traditional home. You can still get very good space in comparison to an apartment, very good privacy in these. They can be much more affordable, and that typically comes down to the smaller land, so it's cheaper entry price. The price, obviously, because it is a smaller unit as well, a lot of the time it'll be more affordable than a larger home in the same location. The reason I put in here pros to townhouses is location. The reason for that is you typically don't find these townhomes or townhouses being put out in the middle of nowhere. Local councils would usually give approval for these to be nice and close to amenities like your shops, your schools, job nodes, etc. The cons can also be space. So typically we're not going to get as large an outdoor area if that's important for what you're looking for. And obviously from a resale point of view, if it is on a smaller block, that can also affect your resale value later. I'm also going to throw stairs into cons for townhouses. We're seeing, especially as our aging population gets older and older, they're typically not wanting to live in houses that have got a staircase, and it's also dead space. So if we start to think about the cost of a home or the value in a home, we need to divide build price into the square meterage rate. On a townhouse or a house that's got stairs, that's actually dead space that you're paying for. So that's something we need to consider when we're looking at these houses. A strata title or a body corporate means that you've also got fees that you're paying to that each year. That can also mean with the body corporate fees, we're also can lack a little bit of individuality because the strata actually has control over what you can and cannot do to that dwelling. For instance, we can't go and just paint the front of the house pink. Not that too many might want to do that, but what it'll mean is we've got some control. We lack control over what we can and cannot do with that dwelling. A townhome is very similar. So it's basically identical to a townhouse, and from the naked eye, it will look identical. The main point of difference between a townhouse and a townhome is that there's no body corporate and it's a single title. Okay, why is that important? It's because obviously, if I'm paying a body corporate, I might be giving away $30 a week out of my rent. Okay, now granted, the body corporate also includes your insurances and things, but I am paying for a body corporate in a townhouse, and I'm not through a townhome. So I actually think townhomes are perfect for a self-managed super fund. Why? Because the contract is still a one-part contract where I pay a 10% deposit, 90% of the balance. It's not a construction loan. So I can actually buy a townhome the same as what I would within a self-managed super fund, but I don't have to pay out these body corporate fees every week. So really, really good from a cash flow perspective. They suit a lot of self-managed super funds. We do a lot of these. In the apartment space, obviously an apartment is a self-contained flat. It's part of a multi-unit dwelling. It is on a strata title and it does belong to a body corporate, okay? The pros for that, lower purchase price, okay? So if we've got, and this again comes down to budget. If I've got a small budget and I can only afford $450,000, I'm going to be very limited on what I could buy in the house space, but in an apartment, I can be very close to all the action. Okay, you can buy in most capital cities, you can still get into the market for 450, and you're going to be close to all of the job nodes like the universities, etc. There's less maintenance a lot of the time because the body corporate will cover a lot of the building maintenance. Security can be very good. You can have great amenities in these apartments now. And I'm going to put a location to amenities as well. You're not going to go and see medium to high density living that's not close to CBDs, transport nodes and jobs. The cons can be less space, body corporate fees. I'm giving away some of my rent every week to that. Smaller land component. By that, again, what I mean, if I'm in a complex of 50 units, the land component is only this big. I own 1/50th of that land, okay, as a one unit owner within that. So obviously that can affect your capital growth moving forward. Reduced flexibility, fewer parking spaces, and they can lack individuality. What I mean by that, again, in the lack of individuality is that my 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment is most likely very, very similar to the other 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom apartments within the same complex. Every time I go to rent, I can almost guarantee there's going to be another one that's I'm competing with, and that can be a fight to the bottom. Likewise, when you go to on sell, that can be somebody else is going to be playing that one against that one. And again, that can be something that we need to consider when we're looking at it from the very beginning. So if I do look at apartments, they need to have something unique about it for me, whether that's the aspect, north facing, nice natural light, whether it's the view, whatever it may be. But there has to be something unique about it. Now we move on to new versus established, okay? So like all investments, there's pros and cons to each, and individual goals and circumstances need to be considered. So in the new versus established, the pros for the new is modern, okay? And that can mean, everything from structural warranties, it can mean, the latest and greatest of amenities within the product as well. So that could be smart technology. Okay, if you think about it from a tenant's perspective, I walk into a new home versus an old home, and the new home has got the ability for me to turn on my heater before I leave work, so it's nice and warm when I get home. I'm going to take that one over the older one. So that's an example of why modern would be better. Warranties. A lot of people don't realise, Terry, that when you buy a brand new home, and I might buy a 25-year warranty with a Metricon home as an example. I sold that to Terry 12 months later. He doesn't have 24 years left on his warranty. It's held on the first mortgagee home or the first owner of that property. And a lot of the time that's not transferable. So it's really important that we think about these things going in. And if you're buying something, as an example, self-managed super fund, we're likely to keep that for many, many years. So if we can find good value in the new space, I typically do recommend new for a self-managed super fund because of things like those warranties. Typically with a new property, we're going to have less maintenance. You've got much better depreciation. And the tenant appeal comes back to that the modernness, which I talked about earlier. And then I'm going to throw affordability in there because we've got things like stamp duty. If you're buying a new build, especially in Victoria at the moment, you've got concessions on new build because of the most recent state budget. There's some great incentives in there for purchasing new. And then the second part is like things like house and land packages. If you buy a 2-part contract where you settle on the land first and then you build, you're only paying stamp duty on the land. So huge savings there. In the con space, I would say location. Again, we'll tie that back to budget. So if I'm thinking about a $450,000 or $500,000 purchase again, in order for me to get something new as a house, I might have to go a long way out from the CBD, okay? Typically, if we're looking for apartments, we can still stay in, but I'm going to put location there as a con in the new space for houses specifically. The other thing would be size. If you think about, especially in the unit spaces, they don't build them like they used to be. They're certainly much smaller than what they used to be going back 10, 15 years ago, where we can look at a 2-bedroom apartment, they'd be 80, 90 metres square, when now they're getting down below the 70 metres square internal.
What about land size? Has that become an issue for people? The blocks of land in which new homes have been built are getting smaller and smaller. Is that a deterrent for some buyers? They just don't have the backyards for the kids to play in.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think you don't see too many kids kicking the footy on the road anymore, Terry. I don't know what it is, but I must say people are getting used to having smaller blocks. I think my advice on that would be you've got to look at the local area. Okay, so I'm not going to go and buy a 350 metre square block in an area that's got all 500 metre square blocks. But if you go into these locations where you've got a lot of the same size, your block's not going to stand out as the small one in the street. Does that make sense? It really does come down to budget, but my advice would be for anybody who's looking at that type of thing, we can get a small block to save on budget, but you might need to go double story, right, to get that extra space. That still allows for a backyard, things like that. So but I suppose as far as a bit of a theme we're seeing is much like the apartments where they started to get smaller, we are seeing that in blocks of land as well.
Is it one of the things that occurs to me about particularly new housing is that they're often built in the new development areas where the infrastructure isn't in place. It may be in the future, but there's quite often not the rail links and the motorways, the schools and supermarkets. They may come in time, but quite often they do lack basic infrastructure.
Yeah, I'd agree. Look, the big thing is if you're looking into new areas for whatever type of dwelling, if you're looking to buy into that, it's so important that you're looking at the amenity that's close by. So if you're buying into an area that didn't have a big block, are there local parks? Are there sporting precincts not nearby? They're going to be very important, not just for a homeowner, but also for your tenants. So pushing on with the new versus old, the other thing that I would say in the new space, which is a con, is speed to market. If you want to buy a house and land package in Geelong or Ballarat or something like that, which a lot of our investors are at the moment, they're going to be waiting a long time for land titles. Okay, so it could be 12, 18 months before you get your first rental bill or first income from that dwelling. So speed to market in the new space can be, especially at the moment, very, very slow. Whereas in the established space, obviously sticking with the speed to market, I could literally buy a property today, settle on it in 30 to 45 days if necessary, and I've got instant income. So the other pros to establish are we can buy established properties in proven markets. We can say that suburb there has got 50 years worth of statistics. I know exactly what I can expect. Now, not to say that there's a crystal ball, but if you've got 20 years worth of statistics, I've got a very good indication of how that suburb has performed and what maybe I can expect in the future. Whereas in the new markets, heading out to your greenfield areas, it's really important to be looking at what's behind the area I'm buying at the moment. This location here, how much land are they going to release thereafter? Things like that, because in years to come, is somebody going to want to pay a premium for my property, or can they buy a block of land within 500 metres and build a brand new home for the same price? Right, so really important to look at. In the established markets, again, we look at location to amenity. Typically, in a lot of greenfield areas, you might be waiting for years for the train to get there. In the established space, closer into the CBDs, we've got all of those employment, transport nodes, etc. In the established space, I'll say, this is a generalisation, but a lot of time in size as well. So older the property, typically a little bit larger. That can be in block size and in the dwelling. We touched on speed to market, and then in the established space, the cons, you're paying full stamp duty. In most cases, there is some variations in different states at the moment for concessions, but typically you're going to pay higher stamp duty. The affordability, because you might be closer into the CBDs, can be much more expensive. Older design has less tenant appeal in a lot of cases. So,
one of the things that appeals to me about established properties, if you get the right ones, is there's the ability to add value and
yes,
to increase or accelerate the wealth creation process through perhaps a renovation, a subdivision if the block's big enough, or adding a granny flat. So that's perhaps another pro for the established property.
Yeah, very good point. It's so for us, and the reason I take my clients through that is because if I'm looking for a buyer's advocate, or if I'm looking for somebody to help me with wealth creation, I want to know that the person that's giving me this advice has got access to everything, and they're not going to say, well, I sell apartments, so I'm going to sell you an apartment. It's really important that you've got the ability to look at it from the very beginning and say, okay, I'm going to get unbiased advice to say, this is the pros and cons to each. This person's going to look at my circumstances, based on those circumstances, recommend a product type based around what's going to get you the best result. And I think that's the key to it, because, as I say, I can't sell or recommend a property to this person and the next door neighbour, the exact same one, when this person's 30 years old, starting their investment journey, and this person's about to retire. Doesn't make sense, does it?
Absolutely. What about the locational factors? I mean, that's what I get asked about more than 90% of the questions are about what about this location? Where's the best location? And how does locational choice differ from one individual to another?
Well, it's a good question. We would say at the moment, I've probably got 4 locations that we're selling in, okay? And the reason for that is because we're looking at budget first, okay? So let's look at what can you afford? And then I look into the areas that suit those budgets, and I say, okay, within here, this is what a new property is going to cost you. This is what the established is going to cost you. But essentially what we're looking for is on the property clock, what markets haven't peaked yet, what markets are looking like they're about to take off, and that's where we focus. And that's why I say probably 3 or 4 markets that we're looking at the moment that'll do that, and we do new and established in each.
Okay. And what about the factor of the locational choice? For me, is sometimes influenced by what an investor already owns. If they already own property and heavily concentrated in, say, Victoria, it might be a good idea to diversify.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that could be, for a number of reasons. It might be typically just because of diversification within the thing. It's if you think about it, in your superannuation, if you're in a typical balanced industry fund, it's not all set in one share market, is it? There's in one asset class. It's divided, and you should think about your property investments much the same. You might have Victoria performing at 5% 1 year, Sydney performing at 8%. And if you've got one in each, you're going to have an average of 6.5. So what that means is if I've got properties within multiple locations across a 10-year period, I'm going to have a much safer opportunity to get growth. The other factor that's got to be taken into consideration as you grow your portfolio is things like land tax. Yeah. More like land you own within the one state.
Absolutely. I just want to, before I go into my next thought or question for Tim, just to remind people out there watching and listening that we welcome your questions and your comments. So if you do have questions for Tim Graham from Reventon, please bang them into the chat box or the Q&A panel. Either will do, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we can in the time we have available. And talking of location, Tim, it seems to me that there's a lot of investors out there, and particularly seem to think that they can buy pretty much anywhere at the moment and get good growth. And I think there's some reckless behaviour going on, that they're buying in places that may give them growth in the next 12 months, but long term may not perform for them, or they're paying too much because they're sitting in the middle of Sydney and Melbourne and think that's cheap. In actual fact, they may be paying too much. So that's an issue, I think, at the moment. Yeah,
look, that comes back to the property clock, doesn't it? Some areas that are, people have heard about in the media, oh, that's a great market, that's a great market. Well, if you're hearing it in the media that it's a great market, it probably has already started to peak, hasn't it? So it's a fascinating one, and I'll probably shoot myself in the foot for saying this, but my job as a buyer's advocate is to try to find value. And right now, I've got to say, it's very, very hard, especially in the established market, to find value, because I see, I look at a property and I say, that's what I think it's worth. I tell my client that, and then a week later, somebody's paid 30, 40 grand higher, and they're disappointed they missed it. And they go, well, if you want to pay a premium for it, you can get into that market, but I'd rather find your value. So I've got to admit, it's been much slower to find the right property for people, but I'd rather get them the right one than jump into something for the sake of getting the deal today.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of that going on. But it really strikes me I referred earlier to the price predict index. I'm constructing the new winter edition and comparing or updating the median price data. And it strikes me that it's just not just the Ballarats and the Bendigos and the Toowoomba's in Queensland and the really good, strong regional markets, Orange in New South Wales, Newcastle, etc. But quite small country towns where probably the economy is essentially about the local agricultural industry, which is fine. But there's a big uplift in sales activity and prices in lots of quite small and remote places. And I think it's indicative that some people aren't choosing location very wisely from a long-term viewpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, there's a couple of factors that will drive that. I think one is that we sat on our hands for 12 months. Everyone's sitting there going, what's going to happen? What's going to happen with this pandemic? And then we've come out of that in 2021 and everyone's gone, hey, we survived, let's get active. So you've not only got investors back in the market. You've got all this stimulus for the first home buyers, and then we've got downsizers as well having a big play on a lot of these markets. So there's so many different trends that are happening all at once on the property market, and then you throw in there the cheapest interest rates in history. So that's making markets everywhere active, because it's not just one piece of the market like investors that's performing. It's everywhere. The only thing I think we don't have at the moment is, in a big way, is the offshore, which I think most people will be happy about. If you threw that back into the equation, it would be a different story.
Look, I think we're going to have a second wave of growth when we get to the point of open the international borders, because I think a lot of people, we always have a very strong overseas migration into Australia at normal times, but I think that's going to be enhanced by the fact that Australia is seen as a safe haven, both economically and but particularly from the viewpoint of handling of the pandemic. I think that's going to be a massive second wave of growth when the borders open again.
Yeah, that's true. Well, it's funny, with one-way traffic coming in with the borders, with all these wealthy expats coming back over, there's a lot of money getting pumped into the real estate now that may have been getting pumped into real estate elsewhere. And then the other factor being that all these international trips that people have been taking for years, that's going into real estate.
Yeah, that's right. There's a huge saving factor that people can't travel overseas, and they've been restricted in that way, and it's increased their savings. I think the expat factor you mentioned is one of many reasons why we have this upcycle in Australian real estate. The numbers that have come back or are coming back and are buying real estate in advance of returning has more than compensated for the lack of overseas migrants in terms of the numbers, and that's been a big factor. Yeah.
Look, the other thing on international borders, probably the big negative that we have at the moment is that anybody that did have accommodation or rentals that were near to universities and things like that, I know that a lot of CBDs have been impacted severely from the lack of international students. So I do hope for all those investors that have got things relying on that the international students do come back soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're starting to get questions and comments coming in from people who are out there watching and listening. I do encourage you to put your questions into the Q&A panel or the chat box. And Guy was just alluding to, you mentioned there's just 4 or 5 key areas that you're buying in at the moment. Says you probably don't want to tell us what they all are, but could you give us an example, maybe 1 or 2, just to illustrate the type of areas you think are good for people to consider?
Certainly. Look, I'm pretty open with this type of stuff, because ultimately you can jump on there and have a bit of a look yourself, and I think you'll find that there's a lot of good data out there. But as you and I know, it's great to pick an area, but you really want to make sure you get the right product within that as well. So for us, one of probably my favourite market at the moment is Springfield in Brisbane. So 40k southwest of Brisbane. It's part of the Greater Ipswich region. But that area there, we talked about this in our last podcast, Terry. It's an $80 billion master plan city. It's not only incredible for Australia, but it's literally on a world-class stage. And that might sound a bit cliche, but they've won best master plan city in the world. So that for me is a really big one. Again, entry-level price down there is you can still find value under the 600 mark, but if you were to go 10 minutes west or 10 minutes to the east, to either Ripley or Greenbank, you can find value under 500. So that's probably my number one. You touched on another one before, Terry, Toowoomba, where we've coined that as the next Ballarat. Similar size in population, great infrastructure projects and things. So that's another area that we're looking at. And then we still find value in your Geelongs and Ballarats. It's just a little bit tougher in the new build space at the moment, just because of the land titles. If you're prepared to wait and land bank, you'll still make money. But yeah, that'd be my top 4 at the moment. The only one that's probably dropped away from that from last year was the Sunny Coast, because the prices have gone ballistic up there, and it's hard to find value in that market at all, especially for an investor. They just they don't want us.
Yeah, and that's sort of a nice segue into a question that's just come in from Mark. Does Caloundra on the Sunshine Coast still have capital growth in the future as an investment? What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, certainly. Look, outside of capital growth, the rent there is incredible. I had a client that we found a place for there in October last year. He just settled on that in March this year. He paid $499, and that's renting at $650 a week. So rents are incredible there. The challenge that we've got there is a lack of land if you are looking in the new build space. And especially in Caloundra, where I'm sure the gentleman's talking about, is that it's a Stocklands estate there at Aura. They just don't want to know about investors. They don't need them. So it's tough in that space. In the established market, I think if you can get good value at the moment, you'll make some good money in years to come, because the infrastructure projects up there are going to last a long time. Yeah. And now we're talking about an area that still doesn't have a train line there. Imagine what happens when you get things like that.
Yeah. I mean, the Sunshine Coast market, the appeal of it and the growth potential has been transformed absolutely by infrastructure spending, very big infrastructure spending, the new medical precinct, the new CBD, which is now under construction, the conversion of the Sunshine Coast Airport to international status, and a whole lot more. And so I think long term, the Sunshine Coast is going to be a performer. I think it's right in the top 4 or 5 in Australia for taking a long term view. But certainly, as you say, Tim, it's so competitive, and prices have gone crazy. And if you want to build, it's just such a shortage of land. I've just done a report for a client, just emphasising the point that it's so very hard to get land, and all of the new sort of greenfield developments are all sort of out near the highway or west of the highway. That along the coastal strip, there's almost nothing available. And even if you can get land, trying to find a builder is next to impossible on the Sunshine Coast.
Well, that's the other thing we haven't even touched on, but the price of construction is just gone through the roof. I had a builder I talked to the other day who put together a package for me this month, and he said that exact package in January was 20 grand cheaper. He goes, I'm nervous, because we do a fixed price contract, right? So, the price of goods keeps on going up. And if he's building that in 6 or 12 months' time, and the prices keep on going up like this, they're going to be cutting into their margins big time.
Yeah, I mean, the anecdotal evidence out of the Sunshine Coast suggests that certain aspects of building a house, like roofing and framing, I mean, the increase in the cost has been exponential.
Even concrete, yeah.
And that's a factor.
So timber shortage as well.
Just want to refer back. You mentioned Springfield, part of the Ipswich market. I know we did a recording, a podcast a few months back, and we talked about that area as a place of great potential and very affordable. But at that time, the numbers we're getting were showing it wasn't actually performing. The Brisbane market is one of the growth markets in the country, no doubt. Its time to shine has definitely arrived. Yeah. Ipswich was lagging, but since then, the latest data has come in sales activity, and there's been a huge uplift in Ipswich. It's suddenly the market's discovered this opportunity that Ipswich presents in terms of affordability, infrastructure, employment nodes that are out there. Yeah, and it's really taken off that market. So you were kind of prophetic in what you were saying about it 2 or 3 months ago.
People must have listened, Terry.
Obviously, they did.
Well, look, the other thing with that market, Springfield just last week announced a public hospital as well, 178 beds or something. So that's fantastic for the area. But the big one out that way, more probably closer to Ipswich itself than Springfield, but the Amberley Air Base. Joining with the Army will be the largest military base in Australia as well. I was up there about 14 weeks ago, was looking at the Ripley town centre there, and I was doing an established property buyer's advocacy job for somebody. We went to 13 inspections on a Saturday, and I would say of the ones that were owned by investors and were rented, 90% of them were all people from the Army, from the RAF base. And you can always tell, because you walk into those houses and they're spotless. Sheets are always perfect. Shoes by the door. They're good tenants.
Absolutely. Look, I think one of the things about Ipswich is, there's a bit of a misconception that everybody works in the CBD, and proximity to the CBD is so paramount. But what I know to be true is that many of the big employment nodes are actually way out there in places like Ipswich, and it's one of the things that it offers. As well as affordability, is that there's some very, very major jobs nodes out there, and the RAF base is one of them. But there's some very big industrial estates. There's some very big things happening. A lot of the people that live out in Ipswich work locally, and so that provision of jobs is a very big factor. Kay's asking a question. To a certain extent, it's one of those very generalised questions to which the answer is, well, there's no one size fits all, but Kay's asking, what's a good return on investment in this market in terms of rental yields?
in terms of rental yields, look, it's the higher we go in price, the lower the yield a lot of the time. So, and then the other thing is, there's some pretty extreme yields that you can get out there by buying products like your NDIS and things. But I typically try to avoid these things. I've seen a lot, like there's a lot to think about when you're looking at things like an NDIS. They're going to get huge yields, but everything has to go right for those big yields to happen. You're not just looking at one tenant that's paying that high yield. Every room might be leased out individually. You can't control it. It's got to be done by the SDA. And I think that you'll find in those types of investments over time, you'll probably have quite a lot of vacancy within each one of those rooms. I also think the higher the yield that you chase, whether it's dual lock, whether it's NDIS, etc., you're probably going to compensate somewhere. Okay, so you might get great cash flow for a few years, but will you get the resale value later? On an NDIS property, for instance, that's only ever going to appeal to, an owner-occupier is not going to buy that home off you later, as it's only going to be investors. So you're cutting out a huge amount of the market. So I know it's a roundabout way of answering the question, but when we talk about rental yields, I'm chasing probably 6% at the moment. I would say be happy with that. But the thing that I'm getting at that 6%, I'm getting in at a $500,000 purchase price as well. We're not looking at having to spend, max out your budget.
That's true that as a general rule of thumb, you're going to find the higher rental yields in the smaller capital cities, and Ipswich would be, and we've just discussed, would be an example of that. Certainly Adelaide is a provider of good rental yields relative to the bigger cities, but in particular in the regional markets. The Ballarats and Bendigos, the Toowoomba's, you're going to be getting rental returns there much higher than the cities, and the way the trends are going, your capital growth prospects are also very good.
Yeah, that's right. I think people have to think about, when they think about yields, they've also got to think about net yield. Okay, you can get very, very good rent, but if you're giving a lot of it away to expenses, it doesn't matter. So you've got to be focusing on your net yield, not your gross yield.
Is there a rule of thumb that you can apply? What sort of a yield do you need in the current market if you can borrow at, say, 2% to achieve cash flow neutral or positive?
Look, to be honest, at the moment, I did this exercise a month or two ago. Let's say that you got a $500,000 loan on an interest-only loan. It's probably going to cost you about $1,000 a month to make the repayments on that. This is a round figure. Now, to think about that from a rental perspective, a $500,000 purchase price, surely I can get $450 a week in rent. And if that's the case, I'm $1,800 ahead on that before expenses. So very, very easy in most markets now to be getting cash flow neutral. Most would be positive.
There's been a lot of media I've seen in the last few months. Do you think that in many parts of Australia, it's actually now cheaper to own than to rent? Do you find that to be true?
Absolutely. And this trend that's been talked about for a long time with rent investors, it's been around for a long time, but it's becoming a hell of a lot more popular. Personally, I know for myself, I'm not going to go and lock myself into a huge mortgage, knowing, hey, I might want to move from that house in a couple of years' time. The way to make money in real estate is not timing the market, it's time in market. Every time you sell down, you've got to buy in the same market somewhere else. So I want to be able to own real estate and hold it for a long period of time. So by being a rent investor, it allows me to do that. I can buy real estate there, live where I want, invest where I should.
Okay. Philip's asking a question that may be something that kind of goes through the minds of many people out there thinking of becoming a property investor, maybe particularly doing a new build. He's asking, just how do I avoid scams? How do I know that the people I'm dealing with are reputable and trustworthy?
Yeah. Oh, look, first place to start would be, if you're dealing with an agent, first of all, check for licenses. So are you licensed? If so, go and check it up. Every one of the states has got an area where you can check that, whether it's with the REIV, whether it's with the BLA, Business Licensing Authority. You can check these licenses, especially in the real estate side of things. As a licensed real estate, we can't have criminal records. The event we do, we can lose our license. So you can check these things. Any red marks against your name will be put on those portals. So that's your first place that I'd start. And then obviously it's equally as important, not just to check on the person that you're dealing with, but the company that they're working for. You can go and buy a piece of real estate off somebody today. If that person leaves tomorrow, is there going to be somebody there to pick up the pieces for you? So I think it's equally as important to look at the company as well as the agent.
Okay. a general question about the Melbourne market, or the Melbourne as a city. I think the question refers to, do you think Melbourne will overtake Sydney? Predictions have been made that the Victorian population will outgrow Sydney.
Yeah,
So,
population-wise, I do. I think from a property price perspective, I can't see that happening. We're not going to overtake Sydney and the medians and that anytime soon. But certainly from a growth perspective, I think once the borders reopen and we start to get skilled migration back in and things, Melbourne's population will start to grow. I know we lost a bit last year from the pandemic, and we're in 4.0 lockdown now. There's probably a few more thinking about making the move, but I do think once we do get through this, vaccines out there and the borders are open, we'll start to see Melbourne's population really take off again.
Yeah, Angela's asking a question that might more correctly be directed towards a quantity surveyor, perhaps, but she's asking about depreciation. A 1-year-old house, does the new owner continue the builder's 25-year-old structural? Oh no, sorry, it's about the warranty, the structural warranty.
Sorry, can you repeat the question, Terry? What was that?
For a 1-year-old house, does the new owner who buys from the original owner get to continue the builder's 25-year-old structural warranty?
Look, my advice would be that you check per state, because I know it varies. I know in Queensland it carries on. I don't believe in Victoria for most of these warranties it does, and it could be something that an individual builder would say, listen, we will honour it for other buyers. But in my experience, it hasn't happened in Victoria. So I'd definitely look into that before you make any purchase, just so you understand.
Sure. Diane asking about specific locations in Melbourne. Heidelberg Heights, Belfield, closer to Ivanhoe for investment purposes. You generally don't direct people into Melbourne markets at the moment, Tim, I think.
Look, we've done last year, like 5 properties are sold in Melbourne. Now, in saying that, the areas that I'm looking at, it's still got the same factors that I'm looking for. Trying to find value, but looking for things, the micro around that area. So, as an example, one of the properties that sold in Melbourne last year was in Reservoir. You have a look at that suburb and its median. You start to look at the ripple effect coming out of the city years before. So you start to move into your Northcotes and your Ivanhoes, etc. Your Fitzroy's even, there's a ripple effect that's jumping each year, and that starts to be seen even from a gentrification perspective. I think that suburb itself just changed overnight as soon as the railway line went overhead instead of running on the road. Congestion freed up. You start to see the fancy restaurants and cafes popping up. We talk about the people that are starting to live there as well. We can start to see that it's gentrifying, and that's exciting. And I think that property might have been worth 550,000, but a brand new townhome, great value for something in an area that's up and coming. So I do look at every individual suburb and a property within that before I'd say good or bad.
And just specifically, I think there was the reference in the question to the Heidelberg area. I mean, I know a little bit about that market, and I think it's a really good place. It's got really good infrastructure and nice lifestyle. One of the things I do remember about is there's lots of green spaces in that general precinct, which is always a nice feature for that's attractive to buyers and tenants. So
yeah, look, absolutely. And again, I'd look at what particular product within that, but that location specifically, huge employment. So you're looking at the hospital there, Austin Hospital. Yeah, Austin, I think it is. And then obviously you've got the cancer wing there as well, the Trove University, which is going to be the biggest university in Melbourne. There's just so much, even vicinity of the CBD, I think you're probably looking at 11 kilometres or something, and really good infrastructure for transport to get back in.
Yeah, I'm personally, I've got a bit of a bias, but based on research and experience towards markets that have university campuses and hospitals in their midst. They're great generators of real estate growth, rental demand, employment, and just life. Universities do tend to generate a lot of life on the streets, cafe culture, etc., and they tend to be growth areas.
It's ironic that that Heidelberg area. This is a perfect segue into what we've been talking about today with buying the right product for the right purpose. So I had a client last year who was a school principal, still is, 60 years old, had 1.3 million in super, had no investment properties at all in his personal name or anything like that. We did help him with one in his personal name, but the thing that he hadn't thought about was he's approaching retirement. And I asked him one question, which scared the hell out of him. I said, what happens if we have a repaint of 1998 and we have 30% of your super gone overnight and you're in retirement? that's a lot to try to get back. Your markets are going to perform extremely well to get that back. You've got no more income going in. And if you're relying on that income from your super and retirement as your means to live, that's a huge knock, right? So what we looked at doing, we helped him set up a self-managed super fund. We've got a full financial planning license here as well. So we set up a self-managed super fund. He bought a property outright in Heidelberg. Okay, great unit, amazing amenities, directly opposite the Austin Hospital, 14,000 employees across the road. Now, the research we did into that area, this product was exactly what people that were living in and around that area wanted. So you've got your surgeons, your nurses, etc., that are wanting something nice and close to work. They want to be able to knock off work, stressful job, walk across the road, they're home. So we bought that outright. And the reason we did that in his super is because rain, hail or shine, that place we know will be rented. I'm very, very confident about that. So if the market crashes and his super crashes, he's still got this income coming through from his rental income. So that's a great example of why that product might not be suitable for somebody at the age of 35 who's buying their first investment property, but perfect for somebody in their retirement wanting cash flow.
Okay. Yes, a good example of the importance of buying the property and the location that's fit for the individual circumstances. So Tim's asking a question that refers us back to Ipswich City and the Brisbane metropolitan area. What are your thoughts on the Churchill and Leichhardt? There's a couple of suburbs, long-established suburbs of Ipswich.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't know them well enough to comment, to be honest. I can't know every suburb in Australia, I'm afraid. But what I do know is, we've seen a lot of growth in that greater area. I'm a really big one. Things we've talked about today will probably make that obvious. I really like being close to job nodes. Okay, so the reason I like Springfield, lots of jobs. They've got one job for every 3 people that live there. So that's a really big thing for me, because you can't get rental growth or capital growth without an increase in income. You get glass ceilings on income in these smaller areas. There's got to be lots of jobs, and that's what's going to drive up the property prices and the rents. So I'm looking for a little bit larger areas. That's why I like the Springfield story.
Belinda's asking a question about apartments on the Gold Coast, specifically Broadbeach. Do you have any sort of particular feelings about that market?
We've done a couple there. It's actually been a really good market in recent times. The rental yields are very good, but the vacancy rates are very, very low as well. There's quite a bit of construction happening up that way at the moment. I still, like, put it this way, if you gave me a budget and said, would you go to Gold Coast at 600? I'd say I can get you better value elsewhere. That'd be my answer. But in saying that, again, if we go back to my school principal story, it could be a really good one. And the other thing is that people are actually buying in locations like this as a second home. I can tell you, if you look out my window in Melbourne at the moment, I wouldn't mind having a place at the Gold Coast right now to escape to when this lockdown is over.
Yeah. There was a reference you just made, but I think it's a very important consideration I'd like to give us an idea for people. I often say to people, when they ask me questions about what do you think about this location, I say, if you think about buying this place, the question you should ask yourself, is this the absolute best place that I can buy right now in Australia? Yes. The whole of Australia is your market, but is this the absolute best place? And quite often the answer would have to be no in some of the locations that people throw at me. So, as a high-rise apartment on the Gold Coast, the best investment you can make right now, you need to ask yourself that question before you commit your money.
The next part with that would be, if I was looking at this apartment here, what are my holding costs on this apartment? The body corporate's realistic. Are they ridiculous? Has it got a pool in there, which is going to push that up? How many elevators? There's a heap of considerations. So it's a very blanket statement to say, would you buy an apartment on the Gold Coast? Yeah, I probably would, if it was the right one.
Okay. There's a question here from Dakin. Can you send a recording of the webinar? It's great content, but I missed a good part of it because I had to take a phone call. Look, everyone who registered for today's event, actually, even if you've missed the whole thing live, you will receive a recording of it. So we send a recording of the event out to everyone who registered. So if you missed all of it or part of it, you will get a recording of it. We're just coming up to the hour, Tim, and I'm just think a good way to end would be to tell people how to contact you if they have follow-up questions or they have a requirement that perhaps you might be able to help them, or just have a chat about their circumstances. How do people get in touch?
Probably the easiest way would be, I'm not sure if Karishma shared a link, but we will have a link to our website or a form that you can fill if somebody wants to get in contact with me. But the other way is just send me an email, tim.graham, which is GRAHAM, at Reventon, REVENTON for November.com.au.
Okay, and also when we send out the recording, which as I said, we do to everyone who registered for today's event, we will have details such as how you contact Tim Graham of Reventon if you'd like to follow up and talk about your situation or your requirement. As,
the other thing, Terry, we've obviously got some joint publications on some of the suburbs that we talked about as well, that we do with Hotspotting. So if people wanting more information on the areas that we've discussed today, I'm more than happy to share some of that info with them as well.
Okay. We've dealt with most of the questions that come today. There's a few that come in very late. Well, you haven't, but if you'd like to follow up and get answers to those questions that unfortunately we haven't been able to deal with in the time available, please contact Tim Graham at Reventon, and I'm sure I'll be happy to help you. Okay, Tim, well thanks for that. I really enjoyed today's discussion. We covered quite a few topics. And quite a few locations that I think will be of interest to people, but specifically we dealt with the question of selecting the right property for you, the individual, and the importance of considering that there's not a one size fits all a situation on property. It's all about you, the individual, what your goals and objectives are, your current situation, your age, and a whole lot more. So thanks for your contribution today, Tim. I think people would have found it informative and useful.
Thank you very much, Terry. Always a pleasure.
Okay, let's do it again soon. And thank you everybody who's participated today. As I said, you'll be seeing a recording of it. And I do encourage you to follow up and make contact with Tim if you do have questions or requirements you'd like to have a chat to. Okay, Terry Ryder.
Good man. Thanks, Terry.
Okay,
thanks everybody.
Okay, bye for now, everybody.